Welcome. And I just want to thank all of those of you who are actually watching these recordings. And I just want to reiterate that we're always happy to have, if you want to stop by and join us let me know, and I'll be happy to send you a link to join us if you'd like to try that. So without further ado, we're going to say the bracha and go into the screen share. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And here we are. So we're reading about Moses' sojourn in Midian and how he was sitting by this well, and that there was a very similar parallel passage to Jacob's experience when he had to go to Aram Naharaim and to sojourn with Laban, and the first experience he had was at a well. And of course, we also have that story of Eliezer at the well. So there's some significance about this. So anyway, we've talked about how Moses rescued the daughters of Jethro, unnamed at this point, and from the shepherds, the male shepherds who were preventing them from watering their sheep, and how Moses personally watered those sheep. So we've read about 3 incidents regarding Moses. We've read about how he killed the Egyptian who was beating the Israelite. We read about how he tried to pacify 2 Israelites who were fighting with each other, and at that point discovered that he realized that what he had done in the first incident was known. We read about his escape to Midian, and we read about this incident at the well. So these kinds of things we can assume, I believe, are supposed to give us some indication of what's involved in leadership. And really and truly, perhaps, job number 1 is that you have to put others ahead of yourself if you want to be a leader. So, Vatavona el Reuel ahivihen. So now we have the name of their father. They came, Vatavona, the daughters came to Reuel, their father. So it turns out that Jethro, and we'll have a Rashi later on that tells us about all these names that Jethro had. And here he's called Reuel. Vayomer, and he said, Madua mihartem bo hayom. Why did you come so quickly? Right? What happened that you're back so soon? Right? So going on, and we have a few sentences without Rashis here. Vatomarna, and so they said, Ish Mitzri, an Egyptian man, Hitzilanu miyad haroim, rescued us from the shepherds, from the hand, literally, of the shepherds. In other words, the control of the shepherds. Remember, hand is a literary metaphor for power, control, something like that. Vagam, not only that, but he also he also drew water out of the well for us. And the word dali is a noun that means a bucket. It's a modern word that means a bucket. So it's connected with the idea of drawing water from a well or a spring. Vayash et hatzon, and he, not only that, he watered the sheep. Vayomer el benotav, so he said to his daughters, Va'ayo, where is he? So where is he? Lama ze azavtem et haish. Why did you leave this man? Why did you leave the man? Kir'en lo, go call him vayochal lachem, so that he eat, literally it says bread, right? Let him, so that he'll be able to, and we just on a simple level say that, so that he can have a meal with us. Invite him to have a meal with us. So the interpreters are sort of curious about these details, right? Whenever the Torah is going into detail like this, so much detail, forgive me, trying to adjust the size here, right? they figure that there has to be a special reason. Okay, so there's some interesting stuff that comes out of this sentence. Lama ze azavtem. Why did you leave him? Right? Hikirbo. So Jethro understood. He recognized regarding Moses, Shehu Mizaro Shel Yaakov, that he was of the seed of Jacob, which is interesting because the daughters say Ish Mitzri. They say an Egyptian man. We know already from the text itself that Pharaoh's daughter brought him as a baby into Pharaoh's court. We can assume that he was dressed as an Egyptian and that he was raised initially in Pharaoh's court as an Egyptian. But here is Jethro saying that he recognized that Moses was a descendant of Jacob. Why? Shahamayim olim likrato, that the waters rose to meet him. And again, I think that's maybe it's a literary device of some kind, of the fact that he was going to the trouble, that he did this, and that when we've had this sort of expression before, that he did it with relatively little effort. That's a possibility, or he did it as if the waters were rising to meet him, that he was happy to do this kind of work. It's a possibility. It's just a thought that I have that, again, there are reasons people say things the way they say them. And the idea of wanting to be helpful, wanting to go ahead and be proactive about this, and that it wasn't typical. And I suspect what it's trying to suggest is that there are cultures that encourage people to behave in a kind way, and cultures that neglect that it can become a cultural thing. And it's something that I noticed, maybe about 10 years ago or so. And that is the degree to which that when we are engaged in tefillot, that when we're engaged in the prayers that we have, the number of values, of positive values that are expressed through those prayers that are reminding us of how we need to behave is quite stunning. That part of the job, yes, it's true that part of prayer for sure essentially is praise and thanksgiving, and as well as supplication and seeking forgiveness. But behind so many of these prayers are values, essentially values, and the idea of character. And we know from Genesis just how important character development is in a human being. So I know I'm going off on this quite a bit, but it is an interesting expression.
But you don't have to separate the praise and thanksgiving from the values, because it's gratitude that allows you to be sincere with praise and thanksgiving.
Right, which is a value. Yes,
Right.
absolutely. And this is a really cool interpretation of Rashi's. So that he eat food with us. Again, a detail. Shema, possibly, Yisa achat mikem. Possibly he might marry one of you. From this statement, and he says, this is an abbreviation that means as is referenced, or kama de it amar. It's an expression that's used in midrashic literature considerably, and it's referencing another such example in the Bible, in this case the Torah. This is from the story of Joseph in Potiphar's house, where it says that Potiphar put everything under Joseph's control except the bread which he ate. And that's understood as a euphemism, as meaning to have conjugal relations with his wife. So just as there, in that context, the lechem refers to conjugal relations, here too, it's being understood in that particular way. that that's in fact what Jethro had in mind. Now, if you say, wait a second, look at the next sentence. Look at the very next sentence. It says, Vayoel Moshe Lashevet et Aish. It contented Moses to dwell with the man. Or we'll see. I think Rashi actually puts it a little stronger than that, but we'll take a look. But essentially, this Vayoel means here he was willing, he desired. And so let's keep going. Look at the very next phrase. Vayitin et Tzipporah bito Moshe, and he gave Tzipporah his daughter to Moses. So here exactly we've got this. Doesn't talk, this next sentence doesn't talk about the meal they were enjoying or the food that they were enjoying. It goes on to talk about Tzipporah. So it's sort of, these are interesting connections that this was an experience I had when I was very new to biblical commentary. And I'd read something like we just read about this interpretation of lechem as meaning conjugal relations. And I'd say, oh, come on. And then I'd read the next sentence, or I'd read a sentence much later on, and I'd realize how insightful these things really were. And of course, I think I don't need to tell you the degree of respect that I have for this material. So look at the Rashi. Vayoel. So he says katargumo. It's as it is translated. And the word in Aramaic, utsave, actually means it pleased Moses. So that it pleased Moses to dwell with him. And there are sfarim acherim. There are other versions of this which are not the same and say kamashma'o, as is implied, which means he was willing. And there's a difference, right, between desirous and willing. So this word vayoel can be both, right? It can support either translation. Vidomelo. So now we go on with vidomelo, and there are similar places where we have this word, okay? Or el na valin. And I understand, okay, that it means may it please you to rest, to spend the night. All right. Velo ho'alnu. Velu ho'alnu, which means were we willing, were we content to, or where we were desirous of. The ho'alti ledaber. Now, this is a reference to Abraham and in his great conversation with God, right before the destructions of the 5 cities of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Tzvoim, and Zoar at the time, right? So here, though, it's a little bit more difficult because ho'alti could mean I have begun to speak, like hitchalti, and it's so not quite the same. So I actually looked at it and I said, maybe we could translate it as, if my words please you. If I'm going to translate ho'alti by Yoel as it pleased, it was desirous. In other words, may my words be pleasing to you, or may you be content to hear my words. That's what Abraham was trying to communicate. Because if you think about it, of course, it is chutzpah, right? It was chutzpah, impudent for Abraham to be questioning God's judgment and God's decision. But that whole passage, of course, speaks out so loudly in terms of compassion, even for those that are wicked, and to make sure that the whole point of Abraham's argument was that he was concerned that there were going to be righteous people destroyed along with the wicked people. Umidrashot, but there's also a midrashic take on this. Lashon Allah, that this ho'alti or yoel, vayoel, is from a root Allah, Aleph Lamed Hey, where in this particular form, the Hey would drop out. And the word Allah means like a ban or a curse. like a formal injunction. So, Nishba lo, he swore to him, that is, Moses swore to him, Shelo Yazuz, that he would not move, literally. Sorry, let's go on here. Mi Midian, from Midian, ki im birshuto, except with Jethro's understood permission, with his permission. So, we had that conversation yesterday about Moses's age and stuff like that. But I believe he was in Midian for a long time, for quite a long time. There are reasons to argue over that. We'll come to that. A very mystical and puzzling story in just a little bit when Moses heads back to Egypt. So, Vatele ben, right? She gave birth to a son, Vayikra Echmo Gershom, and he gave him the name. He called his name literally Gershom. Ger, of course, is a stranger, right? And Sham means there, right? A stranger there. Ki Amar, because he said, thought, right? Ger Hayiti, I was a stranger. Be'eretz Nochriya, famous phrase, in a strange land. I was a stranger in a strange land. And that, of course, is a motif for the Jewish experience in the diaspora over several thousand years. And the whole notion of exile being a fundamental idea within the biblical narrative. And I believe the idea is that our lives here in this world are, in a sense, parallel to that, and that we should understand that our spiritual location and our spiritual place is really our home, and that the experience of the material world, in a sense, is an exile. And the whole notion of what exile brings with it, and the idea of all the lessons, right, that essentially our experience in this world is a learning experience. And I had a friend when I was a rabbi in Canton, Ohio, who I thought said something very profound when he said, "What is the purpose of life?" And his answer was, to learn, to learn. That's the reason we're here, is to learn. And there are, of course, other statements that support such a notion. Going on. A little bit more. Unless any of you would like to comment in the time that we have.
I got something.
Okay, sure.
Okay. Can we go back to Yoel?
Yes.
It is Joel.
Yes.
Because it stuck at me with my brother. It's my brother's name, and it means something having to do with God. And does this possibly have a connection, like God stuck it in his brain that that maybe that's a good idea to go and live with these people?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, you can always understand ale. Okay, this is, of course, L, and
Yeah.
so it could be that difference of vowel could make a difference in the meaning of the word. But definitely, if it, remember, the Torah is written without vowel points.
Right.
And yes, and
they spelled it. I thought they spelled it the same way at Joel, but I would check again.
Consonants,
maybe not.
No, the consonants are correct. They're exactly.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, nevertheless, if it has something to do with God's desire.
Yeah.
That maybe that's what it means.
Yeah, I like that. I like that kind of a little
bit.
bit better, but not tons better, but a little better anyway.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thought. It is an interesting thought.
Oh, gee, that's a great idea. Where do we get those great ideas?
Yeah, but I think your notion of God wanting Moses to do that isn't so distant. That it's possible. That
God's in everything.
There is a little bit of that intimation in that word. In that word, it's true.
Okay, thank you.
Of course. No, thank you for the thought. All right, we'll do just a little bit more there. Right. So new paragraph. Vayhi bayamim harabim hahen. So this is the point. This is it. And it was in those many days. And that's why I'm thinking that there's some support here textually for the idea of Moses being in Midian for a long time. In those many days, Vayamot melech Mitzrayim, it says the king of Egypt died. Vaye anchu vnei Israel, and the children of Israel sighed, min ha'avodah, from the labor. Vayiz aku, and they cried out. They cried out. Vata'al shavatam, and their pleas arose, Ela Elohim, to God, min ha'avodah, from their labor, from the labor. So again, a statement that talks about divine compassion and how God hears our suffering. And there really are many statements, it's certainly a good number of statements that talk about how God suffers, feels the pain of human beings here. Let's see if, okay. So an interesting, again, an interpretation that is interesting. I certainly would never figure this out myself, right? And it was during those lengthy days, right? Those long days, those long, many years. And Yamim could mean years too. It's really referring to a time period, right? Shahaya Moshe Gar Midian, while Moses was sojourning in Midian. Vayamot Melech Mitzrayim, that the king of Egypt died. So there is a tying here of Moses's sojourn in Midian and what was going on in Egypt. And again, what you're going to see in this interpretation, an understanding of the degree of suffering that the Israelites were going through on such a level. You'll see it's pretty explicit. V'hutzrechu Yisrael v'tshuah, and the Israelites required saving, being saved. Moshe haya ro'eh, and Moses was a shepherd. And the idea of a shepherd and a leader, right? We have that symbolism to there, etc. So it is, let's take a look here. Yeah. So right here, right? Moshe haya ro'eh. So we've got this here about God hearing what they had to say. There's going to be another sentence regarding that, right? And just focusing on how much God was paying attention. And then the next sentence says Moses was shepherding, etc. The connection. So Uvat Shua al Yado, and the salvation came by his means, through Moses. Ulachach nismachu parshiot halalu, and for this reason, these two paragraphs are connected to each other, or chapters connected to each other. And this stands for Barashi Yashan. This has to do with some early manuscript of Rashi that may have been left out of other manuscripts or printed editions. But that's this Barashi Yashan. I'll try and finish this off a little bit. Vayamot Melech Mitzrayim. And it says the king of Egypt died. And in Shmot Rabbah, in the Midrash Shmot Rabbah, Nitzdareya, he became leprous. Vahaya Shochet, and what he did was he would slaughter Tinokot Yisrael. I said this is explicit. He would slaughter Israelite babies, Berochetz Badamam, and wash himself in their blood. Again, wow, just really symbolic. So how do we get this? So someone who is leprous and has to be separated from the community and basically go into isolation is halachically considered dead. So cutting yourself off completely from a community is, in a sense, not being alive. Life takes place in community, and how important that is. but also this is giving us a very painful understanding, an explicit understanding of the degree of suffering the Israelites were going through. And again, I think that's the main purpose. What I want to do is try to extract meaning from statements that are made, such as this. So we'll stop here. And I'm going to put in a little marker. And we'll continue here to God willing. So I'm not sure if okay, I'm going to stop the share and stop the recording.